What's up guys, Jordy here. Welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to do something a little bit different, and that is to take a look at the newly released Helix native plugin and see if it could be used in a live worship environment. So if you follow my channel at all, then you probably already know that I'm a big fan of the Line 6 Helix family of products. I have a Helix and I use it every week, and I think it's a great resource for more than just electric guitar players. I really do. I think it's a Swiss Army knife of a tool. If you haven't checked out my video where I walk through how I set up and use my Helix every week, check out that video. It'll be in the description below and then linked somewhere on this video as well. But when I saw that Line 6 released the Helix plugin, it piqued my curiosity because oftentimes there's a computer on stage with me, and oftentimes it's running Mainstage, sometimes it's running Ableton, but typically it's always running some sort of digital audio workstation that can host both VST and AU plugins. And so I thought, I wonder if there's a way I could implement my Helix patches into Helix native and use that in a live environment. So what we're gonna try to do today is take a look at this whole thing from two different angles. The first one is just gonna be simply tone. Can we get the same tone that we know and love from our Helix hardware out of the Helix native plugin? And the second thing that we're gonna look at is setup. What does it take to use Helix native in a live environment, and is it practical? Stick around because you may be surprised at what you see and hear from this demo of the Helix native plugin. I know I was. So if you're looking for something a little bit different and a new way to implement the great Helix tones that you've built in your hardware, I think you may dig this. So let's jump right into the tone section of this video. Let's look at what the Helix native plugin is capable of. And as we do, I want to show you kind of what I have set up just for the purposes of this demo. I have my laptop here beside me, and I have Logic Pro opened. I have the Helix native plugin on this channel here, and then what you're hearing from my voice is on this channel here. I'm not going to go super in depth because if you watch my actual Helix video, this is the same patch, and I'm ultimately taking the same approach to how I use the plugin to what I do with the hardware. So we're just going to kind of click around here and listen to what's happening and see if we can get some of the same sort of sounds that we get from the Helix hardware. I'm going to play some of the same licks I was playing from my hardware video just because I want an actual comparison of the two. You'll see that we have an input and output section here. I did my best to just match what I get from my Helix, the way that my pickups respond to the input of the guitar input of the actual hardware Helix, and I think I got pretty close. Here's that dotted eighth pitch sort of sound that I get from my Helix. Here's that same sound on the bridge pickup. Here's an example of a heavy verb and delay sort of sound that I would use all the time on my hardware Helix. The only difference in what I'm doing right now and how I use my Helix is I've added back in the KWB drive, which is kind of my stage 2 overdrive to this sound. Here's a sound that I refer to as chime drive. It's a sound that I use often for those like big driving bridges and choruses that mainly consist of like driving inversions of chords. Here's a classic dotted eighth sort of sound. Here's another sort of lightly picked heavy verb and delay. Here is the swell sound that we all know and love. I'm having a blast playing Helix native. I can get just as lost in this plugin as I do oftentimes with my hardware Helix. Another big thing is that it feels really good, which I was concerned about because I know that Line 6 did a lot of work with the guitar input of the Helix hardware unit, and I don't understand fully what all they did, but I know that had a lot to do with the feel that it would respond to your guitar playing and dynamics just like an amp would. I don't feel like I'm missing much, if any, of that feel. It sounds and feels great to me. Another thing that I think helped me jump right into this is that oftentimes I edit my Helix patches on the editor, the Helix editor. And so this interface, this GUI, looks just like the one that I'm typically used to using. So it was easy to just jump right into editing my patch. So I think depending on the interface that you're going to be using, which we'll talk about in a second, your computer, the way that you monitor your Helix, I think a lot has to go into you thinking about if you can use the native plugin live. For me, I can say confidently that I could, as long as I could get into a setup that I could count on as much as I can count on my actual hardware Helix. I would have no problem using the plugin in a live environment. So I feel like the native plugin gets a big thumbs up from me as far as just tone goes, the overall sound of the plugin. I'm really happy with the sounds that I'm getting from it. So now I'd like to move on and see, would it be practical to use this in a live environment? Okay, so what you're seeing here is what I had set up for the tone section of the video, which is just Logic Pro set up with a channel for my vocal and a channel for the guitar. You'll see in a second what I'm plugged into interface-wise to get all this happening. But I just dropped the plugin onto that channel and brought up my regular patch, the Worship Tech Tools patch, which you can download at theworshiptechtools.com. There will be a link in the description as well. And I just started playing, and I did have to edit, did have to adjust the input level just a little to kind of match what I think happens on the input of the Helix itself. So other than that, I immediately jumped into playing this just like I do my Helix, and was really, really happy with it. The problem is this works really well in a studio environment, but this would be tough using Logic in this way, just on a channel strip. It would be tough to use Helix native like this in a live environment, just because it's not really what Logic was built to do, so much so that Apple built Mainstage primarily for live use. And so I'd like to jump over to Mainstage, and I want to be clear, Mainstage isn't the only way to use it live. You can use it live with Logic, you could use it live with Ableton or anything else, but I want to show you kind of an implementation from Mainstage, because Mainstage is incredibly affordable. So let's jump over to my Mainstage setup here. So what you're seeing is the layout of my little Helix native setup for Mainstage. And you can see I just have a patch bank here and then some buttons, a master volume knob and an output. If we go into edit mode here, what I've done is I dropped the Helix native plugin on the concert level. And I'm not going to get into the super details of Mainstage routing and patch building and all that stuff, but basically dropping it on the concert level means that it's available on each song, on each patch. So I dropped the Helix native plugin on the concert level, and then I assigned these buttons to Helix functions. And the way that you do that, if you open the Helix native plugin, down here you see you've got automation controller assign. If you click that, you can click any block within your patch and then assign it to a switch. And so what I did, and there's lots of different ways to do this, but what I did is I assigned each block to its own switch, and it was just in order, switch 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, going in a progression throughout the blocks. And then I created these buttons on my Mainstage layout, and then I would assign these buttons to either one or, most of the time, multiple switches within Helix Native. And so a good example of this is my swell patch. So if I click the swell button, you can see the assignments. It's turning on 4 switches, and it's just set to bypass those switches. Meaning if I hit it, they're engaged. If I turn it off, they're not. And you saw this other one light up because of the way I have it set up right now. But the point I'm getting at is you could essentially get the exact same use out of Mainstage running Helix Native as a Helix hardware unit with these as snapshots. So I kind of have these functioning as snapshots for me. And the way that I would go about doing this is I would take each song and I would give that song its own tempo right here at the change tempo 2. And now I have the Helix native plugin set to follow the host, which is Mainstage in this case. So whenever I change songs, it's going to change tempo just like it does in my hardware Helix. So in the same exact way that I'm using, like 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D in the actual Helix, in this way I just use songs 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then assign each song a tempo that's going to change the tempo of the Helix native plugin for me. If this is something you guys are interested in as a Mainstage Helix live setup, let me know and I can throw together a Mainstage concert that's built specifically for Helix that's kind of turnkey and ready to go. So let me know if that's something you guys would be interested in. But essentially that's the software side. So right now the only way to turn these switches on and off is to click them with my mouse. And obviously that's not ideal. So let's back out of the software side of this and talk about the hardware piece and how we would have to go about using Helix native within Mainstage from a hardware standpoint. So essentially the way Mainstage works is that you can use anything that can send MIDI to your computer to control any button or switch that you build in your layout. And so what I would recommend is something like the Luptimus or the Morningstar MC6. And what the Morningstar MC6 can do is you can just map any MIDI note or function to one of those 6 switches, give it a label, and then assign that switch to one of those buttons that you created within Mainstage that is telling the Helix native plugin what to do ultimately, what switches or what pedals and blocks to turn on and off. Oftentimes these MIDI foot controllers like the Morningstar MC6 and the Luptimus have expression pedal inputs, so you could just plug in like a cheap M Audio expression pedal and then fade it in and out and assign it to volume, and then you have a dedicated volume pedal just like you would on your pedal board. The big idea here for me was just kind of proof of concept. I just wanted to see, is it possible to use a plugin like Helix native for electric guitar in a live environment? So obviously we're all different. For me, I absolutely think it's possible to use a setup like this live. I think it would take work getting it dialed in and getting things, most importantly, dependable, where you can open the laptop, set it down, and go. You're ready to go. But a scenario where I really see this making the most sense is if there's already a computer on stage with you doing other things. So for example, if you're using Ableton Live to run tracks, if your keys player is using Mainstage, or if anybody on stage is using a laptop with a digital audio workstation that can host plugins, that's where this is really going to make the most sense. That's really the way I see myself using Helix native in a live environment. One of the services that I lead for at my church, our keys player is using Mainstage already. So for me to just run a USB cable from a MIDI controller and dropping a Helix channel strip in Mainstage, just like I showed you today, would be a really easy way for me to have great electric guitar sounds live. Well, that's the video, guys. This was just a quick look at the Helix native plugin to see if we could make it work for us in a live environment. If this is something you could see yourself doing, let me know in the comment section below. And if you need help along the way, this is something I'd love to dig into more as well. And so make sure and leave a comment and let me know that that's something you're interested in. Well, if you guys like content like this and want to see more of it, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about using things like Helix native in a live environment, drop a comment in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video.